One lazy afternoon, a stoner was strolling along the beach, the sun warming his back and the waves whispering against the shore. As he shuffled through the sand, his foot struck something hard. Curious, he bent down and brushed away the grains to reveal an old, dusty lamp. With a grin, he picked it up and gave it a rub. In a flash of swirling smoke, a towering genie appeared, his deep voice booming. "Mortal, you have summoned me. You are granted 3 wishes. Choose wisely." The stoner, unfazed, scratched his head and grinned. "All right, for my first wish, let's smoke a joint together." The genie blinked, clearly not expecting that, but after a moment he shrugged. With a flick of his wrist, a perfectly rolled joint materialized. They lit up, passing it back and forth in comfortable silence, the salty breeze mixing with the fragrant smoke. After a while, the genie, looking more relaxed than usual, asked, "And your second wish?" The stoner exhaled slowly, his eyes half-lidded. "You know what? Let's smoke another one." The genie chuckled, snapped his fingers, and another joint appeared. They sparked it up, leaning back, watching the waves roll in. The silence stretched, content and easy. Eventually, the genie cleared his throat. "All right, what is your third wish?" The stoner pondered for a long moment, a slow smile creeping across his face. "Okay, for my third wish, let's smoke one more." The genie sighed but obliged, conjuring up another joint. They smoked in companionable silence until the last ember faded into the sand. With a final puff of smoke, the genie gave a small nod and vanished back into the lamp. The stoner stretched, staring out at the horizon, fully at peace. But just as he was about to head off, a swirl of smoke erupted from the lamp once more. The genie reappeared, this time holding a box of chicken nuggets. "All right," he said, popping one in his mouth. "So what's your fourth wish?" The retirement dinner for Dr. Tim Simmons was a grand affair. The banquet hall was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the warm glow of admiration from his colleagues, friends, and family. Tim had lived an extraordinary life, one that left an undeniable mark on the world. At just 25, he had embarked on a mission trip to South America, where he met 2 young boys who would later become his adopted sons. Seeing the hardships of life in impoverished regions ignited a fire in him, leading him to pursue medicine. And he didn't just study it, he mastered it. Over the decades, he developed vaccines for over 10 deadly diseases, saving countless lives. But he never sought wealth or recognition. Every cent he earned, he poured back into relief efforts for the places he had visited. His co-workers revered him, his friends adored him, and ask anyone, they would all say he was the brightest, kindest, most selfless man they had ever known. So perhaps it wasn't entirely surprising when, in the middle of his retirement dinner, something miraculous happened. As Tim stood to give his speech, a brilliant light filled the room. Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd as an angel descended from the heavens, its radiance casting long shadows against the walls. The room fell silent. The angel spoke, its voice calm yet commanding. "Timothy Simmons, you have lived a life of service and generosity, a beacon of kindness in a world that so desperately needs it. Because of this, we wish to bestow upon you a gift, one of your choosing. You may have a long and healthy life, all the wealth you could ever imagine, or unparalleled wisdom." The guests held their breath, eyes locked on Tim as he considered his options. Longevity? Tempting. Wealth? Practical. But wisdom, true, limitless wisdom, how could he turn that down? His decision came quickly. "I choose wisdom." The angel nodded solemnly, reached down, and pressed a single glowing finger against Tim's forehead. A rush of energy coursed through him, filling his mind with knowledge beyond human comprehension. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the angel vanished. The room remained silent, the air thick with anticipation. Tim stood there, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open, as though processing the infinite truths now laid bare before him. His best friend, unable to hold back any longer, leaned forward and asked, "Well, how does it feel?" Tim blinks, swallows hard, and exhaled. Then, after a long moment of contemplation, he finally spoke. "I should have chosen the bloody money." An Englishman, an American, and a Japanese man found themselves battling the furious rapids of a raging river, their raft lurching wildly as they fought to keep control. The water roared around them, white foam sprang into the air. Then suddenly the current surged faster. Up ahead, the river disappeared into the horizon, a waterfall, a massive one. Panic gripped them as they realized the terrible truth. There was no way out. They were moments away from plunging over the edge to certain doom. Then, in a flash of shimmering light, a figure appeared above the water. A genie, ancient and otherworldly, hovered before them. "I am the spirit of this waterfall," the genie declared, his voice echoing over the thundering waters. "My power is limited. I cannot save you, but before you meet your fate, I may grant each of you one final wish." The American, clutching the raft's ropes, straightened up with pride. "I love my country," he said, his voice filled with patriotic fervor. "Before I die, I want to sing my national anthem one last time, the full version. Not just the first verse, every verse. I want my friends to have lyric sheets so they can sing along, and I want a full backing orchestra. No, better yet, a gospel choir, too." The genie nodded. "It will be done." Next, the Japanese man bowed slightly, his expression serene. "I love my country too," he said. "Nothing represents it better than our cuisine. Before I die, please let me taste the delicacies of my village one last time. I want fermented sticky soybeans, fresh sea urchin, raw horse meat, pickled seaweed, and sugared omelets. And please, provide enough so my friends may share the meal with me." The genie nodded again. "It will be done." Then the Englishman stepped forward, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. He leaned in close and whispered in the genie's ear, "Just send me over the bloody waterfall before the song starts and the food gets here." It was a perfect afternoon for a stroll along the beach. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the waves as they lapped gently at the shore. Seagulls called overhead, and a light breeze carried the scent of salt and adventure. A man, enjoying his peaceful walk, suddenly stumbled over something buried in the sand. He landed face first with a grunt. Brushing himself off, he turned to see what had tripped him. Half buried in the sand was something metallic, worn by time and tide. He pulled it out and turned it over in his hands. An old lamp. His heart skipped a beat. He had heard of stories like this. Could it be? With growing excitement, he brushed the sand from its surface. In an instant, a great billow of blue smoke erupted from the lamp, twisting and curling into the sky. The smoke took shape, solidifying into a towering 7-foot-tall genie, his deep voice booming across the shore. "You have awakened me, O master," the genie declared. "I shall grant you 2 wishes. Speak, and they shall be made true." The man blinked in disbelief. "Wait, 2? I thought it was supposed to be 3 wishes?" The genie simply smirked and gestured toward the man's trousers. "Look inside your pants." Curious, the man hesitantly peeked. His eyes widened. His jaw dropped. "My God, I'm enormous!" The genie folded his arms, grinning. "Not my first time." It was another slow afternoon at the office. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the rhythmic ticking of the clock, and the distant chatter of co-workers made for a mind-numbing symphony of bureaucracy. A government clerk, desperate for something, anything to break the monotony, decided to poke around in his old filing cabinet. Most of the drawers were filled with forgotten paperwork, outdated memos, and the occasional half-eaten candy bar from years past. Then, buried at the back of the bottom drawer, he found something unusual, an old brass lamp. He turned it over in his hands, admiring its antique look. "This will look great on my mantel," he thought. That evening he sat down in his living room, a rag in hand, and began polishing the lamp. Poof! A cloud of swirling smoke erupted from the lamp, filling the room with a golden glow. When the haze cleared, a towering genie stood before him, arms crossed and voice booming. "Noble sir, you have freed me. I shall grant you 3 wishes." The clerk's eyes widened, but his excitement quickly turned into careful consideration. He needed to choose wisely. "All right," he said, licking his lips. "For my first wish, I'd like an ice-cold Coke, right now. Snap! The genie waved a hand, and suddenly, a perfectly chilled bottle appeared in the clerk's grasp, condensation dripping down the sides. He twisted off the cap and took a long, satisfying gulp. Now, feeling refreshed and thinking more clearly, he grinned. For my second wish, I want to be on a tropical island, surrounded by beautiful women who find me absolutely irresistible. Snap! The office walls vanished, replaced by golden sands, swaying palm trees, and a deep blue ocean stretching to the horizon. Around him, gorgeous women lounged in bikinis, throwing him smoldering glances. He could hardly believe his luck. Then came his final wish, the most important one. He thought long and hard before speaking. For my third wish, I never want to work again. Snap! Suddenly, the warm breeze was gone. The sound of waves crashing against the shore disappeared. The clerk blinked. He was back in his government office. One bright afternoon, an Irishman, an Englishman, and a Scotsman were strolling along a quiet beach, enjoying the salty breeze and the warmth of the sun on their backs. As they walked, something half buried in the sand caught the Scotsman's eye. "Look at this!" he said, bending down and pulling out an old, weathered lantern. Curious, he gave it a wipe with his sleeve, and before any of them could react, poof! A massive cloud of smoke billowed out, twisting and forming into the shape of a towering genie. His booming voice echoed across the beach. "You have freed me! As a reward, I will grant each of you one wish!" The three men exchanged glances, barely able to believe their luck. The Scotsman spoke first, his voice filled with pride. "I come from a long line of fishermen. My father, his father before him, and my son will be one too. I want all the oceans to be full of fish for all eternity, ensuring my people will never go hungry." The genie nodded, snapped his fingers, and poof! The seas shimmered as they teemed with fish, more abundant than ever before. The Englishman, impressed by the display, took a step forward. "I want a great wall around England, 150 feet high, 50 feet thick, completely surrounding the country so that no one can get in or out. A fortress to protect England for all eternity." The genie nodded again, snapped his fingers, and poof! A massive wall rose from the ground, stretching as far as the eye could see, encircling all of England. Finally, the Irishman stepped up, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "This wall," he said. "Tell me more about it." The genie, pleased to describe his work, replied, "It's impenetrable. Nothing can get in, nothing can get out. A perfect fortress around England, just as your friend wished." The Irishman nodded slowly, then smiled. "All right then, fill it up with water." One lazy afternoon, a blonde redneck was wandering through the woods when his foot hit something hard. Looking down, he saw an old, dusty lamp sticking out of the dirt. "Well, I'll be darned," he muttered, picking it up and brushing off the grime. Curious, he gave it a good rub, and poof, a massive cloud of smoke erupted, swirling and forming into the shape of a genie. The genie stretched his arms, cracked his neck, and looked down at the man. "You have freed me! I shall grant you 3 wishes!" The redneck scratched his head and thought for a moment. Then his face lit up. "All right, for my first wish, I want a bottomless mug of beer." Snap! A cold, frosty mug appeared in his hand, golden liquid sloshing inside. He lifted it to his lips and took a big gulp. Delicious. He took another sip, and to his amazement, the beer refilled itself instantly. His eyes went wide. Holy smokes, this is the best thing ever. He took another gulp, and another. No matter how much he drank, the mug remained full. The genie, arms crossed, tapped his foot. "And what about your other 2 wishes?" The redneck paused mid-sip, blinking as if the genie had spoken a foreign language. He looked at the mug, then back at the genie. A slow grin spread across his face. "I'll take 2 more just like this one." Millions of years ago, 3 dinosaurs were lumbering through the jungle when they stumbled upon something unusual. A strange golden object half buried in the dirt. "What in the prehistoric world is this?" one of them asked, brushing off the dust. Curious, they gave it a rub, and poof! A massive dino genie appeared, his smoky tail curling into the air. "You have awakened me," the genie bellowed. "I shall grant each of you one wish." The first dinosaur, licking his chops, didn't have to think long. "All right, I want a big, juicy piece of meat." With a snap of the genie's fingers, boom! A colossal, mouth-watering steak appeared in front of him, still sizzling. He let out a delighted roar and dug in. The second dinosaur, not wanting to be outdone, furrowed his brow. "I know. I want a whole shower of meat." The genie nodded and snapped his fingers. Bam! Suddenly, gigantic slabs of meat began raining down from the sky, covering the ground in delicious carnivorous delight. The third dinosaur, determined to outshine the others, thought harder than both of them combined. He clenched his claws, squinted his eyes, and grinned. "I've got it," he roared. "I want a meteor shower." John had always loved visiting his grandfather. The old man lived in a tiny, secluded cabin in rural Saskatchewan, surrounded by endless fields and the kind of silence you could only find in the countryside. After a long evening of reminiscing and storytelling, morning came, and his grandfather whipped up a hearty breakfast: crispy bacon, golden eggs, and toast fresh off the pan. But as John picked up his plate, he hesitated. A strange, filmy residue clung to the surface. "Grandpa, are these plates clean?" he asked, trying to sound polite. His grandfather waved a hand dismissively. "They're as clean as cold water can get 'em. Now eat up, sonny." John wasn't entirely convinced, but he didn't want to offend the old man, so he ate in silence. Lunchtime rolled around, and his grandfather served up thick, juicy hamburgers. As John grabbed his plate, he noticed tiny specks along the edges, leftover egg from breakfast, or worse. "Grandpa, are you sure these plates are clean?" he asked again, his stomach turning slightly. The old man barely looked up. "I told you before, sonny, they're as clean as cold water can get 'em. Now hush and eat your lunch." John sighed and forced himself to take a bite. Later that afternoon, as he was getting ready to leave for town, John's grandfather's dog, a grizzled old mutt, suddenly stood in his path. The dog bared its teeth and let out a low, menacing growl, refusing to let John pass. Startled, John called out, "Grandpa, your dog won't let me get to my car." Still glued to the football game on TV, his grandfather barely raised his voice as he shouted, "Cold water, get on out of the way now!" A young male frog, feeling a bit lonely, decided to visit a psychic for guidance on his love life. Sitting across from the mystical fortune teller, he croaked, "Tell me, when will I meet my one true love?" The psychic closed his eyes, placed his hands over the crystal ball, and after a moment of deep concentration, he smiled. "Ah, I see it clearly," he said. "You are going to meet a beautiful young girl, and she will be absolutely fascinated by you. She will want to know everything about you, where you came from, how you live, and what makes you special." The frog's eyes widened with excitement. "That's amazing! Will I meet her at a party? Maybe by a pond at sunset?" The psychic shook his head. "No," he said. "You'll meet her in her biology class." One afternoon, a man was driving past a farm when he spotted the most stunning horse he had ever seen standing in a field. Something about the animal just spoke to him. It looked strong, majestic, and worth every penny. Determined to make it his, the man pulled over and approached the farmer. "Hey there, sir. That's a beautiful horse you've got. I'll give you $500 for him." The farmer shook his head. "Sorry, he's not for sale. He doesn't look too good." The man glanced back at the horse. To him, it looked perfectly fine. "Come on, he looks great. All right, how about $1,000? The farmer sighed. "Look, I'm telling you, he doesn't look too good." Now the man was even more convinced he had to have this horse. Clearly, the farmer didn't see the real value in it. Determined to seal the deal, he made one final offer. $1,500, and we've got a deal. The farmer hesitated, but finally shrugged. "All right, if you want him that bad, but I warned you, he don't look too good." Feeling victorious, the man took the horse home. The very next day, he stormed back to the farm, furious. "Hey, you cheated me! You sold me a blind horse!" The farmer, unfazed, leaned back against his fence and tipped his hat. "Now hold on there. I told you he didn't look too good, didn't I?" A man walked into a bar, sat down, and called over the bartender. "Hey, if I impress you, can I get a free drink?" The bartender, always up for a good show, shrugged. "Sure? Why not?" The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny grand piano, placing it gently on the counter. Then he pulled out a small rat and set it down beside the piano. To the bartender's amazement, the rat climbed onto the bench, cracked its tiny knuckles, and began playing a beautiful melody. Stunned, the bartender poured the man a beer. The man grinned and said, "If I impress you even more, can I get free drinks for life?" The bartender, convinced nothing could top what he just saw, laughed. "Go ahead, knock my socks off." The man reached into his pocket again and pulled out a frog. As soon as the frog was placed on the counter, it began to sing along to the rat's piano playing, belting out a tune with a voice that would put Sinatra to shame. The bartender nearly dropped a glass. "This is unbelievable." Just then, a wealthy-looking man in a suit and cane walked into the bar. He saw the incredible performance and immediately approached. "Sir, I'll give you $2 million for both of them." The owner shook his head. "Sorry, not for sale." The rich man thought for a moment. "All right, how about just the frog? I'll give you $500,000. The owner smiled. "Deal." The rich man handed over the cash, took the frog, and left. The bartender, still in shock, turned to the man. "What the hell? You could have made millions. Why would you sell the frog and not the rat?" The man chuckled, took a sip of his beer, and said, "Relax. The rat's a ventriloquist." A farmer named Muldoon lived alone in the Irish countryside, his only companion being a loyal dog he'd had for many years. One day, the old dog passed away, leaving Muldoon heartbroken. Wanting to honor his beloved pet, he went to see Father Patrick at the parish. "Father, my dog has died. Would you be willing to say a mass for him?" Father Patrick shook his head. "I'm sorry, Muldoon, but we can't hold services for an animal in the church. However, there's a new denomination down the road. Lord knows what they believe in. Perhaps they'll do something for your poor dog." Muldoon nodded. "I'll go right away. Oh, by the way, do you think a $50,000 donation would be enough for the service?" Father Patrick's eyes widened. "Hold on now, Muldoon. You never told me the dog was Catholic." Once upon a time, two canaries shared a cage, one male, one female. After months of living side by side, the male finally worked up the courage to introduce himself. He hopped over and chirped, "Since we're in this together, how about I move over to your side?" The female ruffled her feathers and replied, "No, thanks." A little embarrassed, the male shuffled back to his side but couldn't stop thinking about her. After some time, he tried again. This time he said, "I'm sorry if I was too forward before. Maybe we could start by getting to know each other." Again, she shook her head. "No, thanks." Feeling rejected, the male sighed and retreated, but he wasn't ready to give up just yet. Summoning his last bit of courage, he met her halfway across the cage and pleaded, "Well, could we at least talk?" The female sighed and finally admitted, "Oh, I'm so sorry. It's not you, really. I just found out I have a canarial disease called chirpies, and I hear it's untweetable." One day, a young couple snuck into a field to have some private time. Just as they were getting into it, a little boy happened to pass by and caught them in the act. The couple panicked, and the boy grinned and said, "I won't tell anyone, if you let me try too." The girl hesitated, but eventually agreed. The boy excitedly stepped forward, but after several awkward attempts, nothing happened. He kept trying and trying, but nothing. Frustrated, he finally threw his hands up and said, "You know what? I'm telling everyone. Bad things deserve punishment." One evening, a massive muscular man walked into a bar. His shoulders were broad, his arms bulged like tree trunks, and his chest looked like it had been carved from stone. But despite his impressive physique, one thing stood out. His head was unusually small, almost comically so. The bartender handed him a beer, eyeing him curiously. After a moment, he leaned in and said, "Look, I'm not gay or anything, but I gotta say, your body's insane. You look like a superhero, but I have to ask, why is your head so small?" The big guy sighed, clearly used to the question. He took a slow sip of his beer, then nodded. "All right, I've told this story 100 times, but here goes." He set his glass down and began. "Years ago, I was out hunting deep in the woods when I got lost. After wandering for hours, I heard a tiny voice calling for help. I followed the sound and, to my surprise, found a small frog sitting next to a stream. It looked up at me with big, pleading eyes and said, Kiss me. If you do, I'll turn into a genie and grant you 3 wishes." The bartender raised an eyebrow but stayed silent. Now, I know it sounds crazy, but I figured I had nothing to lose. So I looked around to make sure I was alone, then leaned down and kissed the frog. He paused for effect, then continued. Poof! Just like that, the frog transformed into the most stunning, voluptuous, completely naked woman I had ever seen. She smiled at me and said, "You now have 3 wishes." The bartender leaned in, fascinated. First, I looked at my skinny 60-kilo frame and said, "I want a body like Arnold Schwarzenegger." She nodded, whispered something, and poof! Suddenly I was huge. My clothes shredded off my body, and I stood there completely ripped, like a god among men. The bartender nodded. "Makes sense so far." The man smirked. For my second wish, I looked at this gorgeous woman and said, "I want to make sensuous love with you, right here by this stream." "And did she grant it?" the bartender asked. The man chuckled. "Oh, she did. We made love for hours right there under the stars. It was incredible." He took another sip of his beer before finishing the story. Afterwards, as we lay there, sweating and satisfied, she whispered in my ear, "You know, you still have one more wish. What will it be?" The bartender nodded, hanging on every word. "So, what did you wish for?" The big guy grinned, stretched his arms, and said, "Well." I looked at her and said, "How about a little head?" Deep in the heart of the Australian outback, a weathered old trucker stomped into a roadside cafe, the dust of the highway still clinging to his boots. But he wasn't alone. Right behind him, matching his stride, was a full-grown emu. The waitress behind the counter did a double-take but shrugged it off. She'd seen all sorts pass through this place. "What'll it be, mate?" she asked. The trucker pulled off his hat, wiped his brow, and said, "I'll have a hamburger, chips, and a Coke." He turned to the emu. "What about you?" The emu bobbed its head. "Sounds great. I'll have the same." The waitress, now thoroughly intrigued, jotted down the order and disappeared into the kitchen. A short while later, she returned with their meals. "That'll be $9.40, she said. Without even glancing into his wallet, the trucker reached into his pocket, pulled out the exact change, and handed it over. Not a cent more, not a cent less. The next day, like clockwork, the trucker and his feathery companion strode in once again. "The usual?" the waitress asked, eyeing them with curiosity. "Yep," said the trucker. "Sounds great. I'll have the same," echoed the emu. Again, when the bill came, the trucker reached into his pocket and produced the exact amount needed, down to the last cent. This routine continued, day after day, week after week. Then one Friday night, the pair strolled in as usual, but this time the trucker shook things up. "Not tonight, love. It's Friday, so I'll have a steak, baked potato, and a salad." "Same for me," said the emu. The waitress smirked as she took the order, now dying of curiosity. A short while later, she returned with the plates. "That'll be $32.62, she said. Once again, without even looking, the trucker reached into his pocket and pulled out the exact amount. This was too much. The waitress couldn't hold back any longer. "Mate, I have to ask, how on earth do you always have the exact change every single time?" The trucker leaned back in his chair, took a sip of his Coke, and gave her a knowing grin. "Well, love, a few years ago I was cleaning out the back shed when I found an old lamp. Gave it a good polish, and boom, out popped a genie. Offered me 2 wishes. The waitress leaned in, fascinated. "So you wished for unlimited money?" "Not exactly," the trucker chuckled. "I wished that whenever I had to pay for something, I could just reach into my pocket and pull out the exact amount. Whether it's a carton of milk or a brand new Rolls-Royce, the money's always there." The waitress's eyes widened. "That's genius! Most people would just ask for $1 million, but you'll never run out of money for as long as you live." "That's right," the trucker said with a satisfied nod. The waitress hesitated, then finally asked the question that had been bugging her from the start. "Okay, but what's with the emu?" The trucker sighed, ran a hand down his face, and muttered, "Ah, yeah, For my second wish, I asked for a tall chick with a big rump and long legs who agrees with everything I say.